July 11th, 1864. Henry Tracey Coxwell is running for his life. His hair is disheveled, his clothes have been ripped, and a bloodthirsty mob is right on his heels. Behind him lies his life's work. This is gonna be the worst ballooning day of all time. So before the Wright brothers discovered heavier than air travel in 1903, the big boys in the aviation world were the ballooning guys. And one of the biggest was Henry Tracey Coxwell. Coxwell became famous for his 1862 flight where he reached an altitude of possibly 37,000 feet. The reason for this confusion is that because the entire event was a disaster, the actual descent mechanism that they had on the balloon broke, and around 29,000 feet, the meteorologist that he brought along with him passed out. The only reason that those two people survived that famous flight was that Henry climbed up on top of the balloon and ripped the gas valve open so they could have the very fast fall back to the earth. And due to this record-breaking height and, Coxwell's act of molar bravery, the two became celebrities in the ballooning world, but also to general pop culture. And because of this celebrity, you get these great interviews about that flight where they're like, yeah, we brought these pigeons up just to see what would happen, and we dropped one off and it just fell down like a stone. And following this historic flight, Henry built an even bigger balloon, which could hold over 100,000 cubic feet in gas, which was 10% bigger, which was 10% at least more impressive. And to make sure that there wasn't any problems with the new aircraft, Coxwell planned some low altitude flights to test his construction, one of which would take off on the 11th of July, 1864, from the race course at Victoria Park, during a fete organized by the Foresters Friendly Society. Such a friendly sounding place for what was going to be a bloody event. The record-breaking flight that Coxwell had did earlier had made him into a big star to the general public, but I don't think that anybody would have expected how big of a draw he was for this ballooning event, because 50,000 people showed up to this race course in Leicester. And based off what happened next, seemingly 90% of the people who showed up were born and bred hooligans. Issues started to form right from the get-go because the police department only sent 8 officers for this horde of people. This lack of policing became an issue when one of the ruffians began loudly proclaiming to everyone that was within earshot that this balloon was in fact not the new balloon that was promised, but an older, smaller one. Now, this wasn't true in any way, shape, or form, but it got people mad, so they started tearing down the little barriers that had been put up. And as this unruly crowd pushed in, they began demanding that Coxwell immediately take off with the balloon. However, even if he wanted to, he couldn't, because seemingly out of the 50,000 people that showed up, not one of them was the carpenters that he had hired to take off the scaffolding off this balloon. Because he had to do it alone, taking off the scaffolding was a very long process, and as the minutes passed, the crowd got madder and madder, and if he was expecting any better treatment from the well-to-do residents of Leicester, he was quickly corrected, as he later stated in his autobiography, "Those who had paid their money and obtained tickets pounced into the basket with such a rude and unceremonious manner that all operations were stopped, and the passengers themselves were preventing their own departure. One person seated in my car was a disgrace to his town, and by his gestures and foul language, he excited the mob and induced the belief that there existed on my part a disinclination to ascend." So now, with both his passengers and the crowd in general against him, things began to deteriorate really quickly, and people just began climbing on the balloon itself. And if you were wondering, was there possibly a liquid substance that could have possibly been fueling this behavior? That question was answered, because the bottles just started being thrown onto the balloon, and I don't think that they were Sunny D bottles either. Because of this incredibly unsafe behavior, Coxwell was like, hey, listen up, if you guys don't back off, I'm going to have to just pull the plug on the balloon. And to this, very reasonable response, he just kept getting cursed out by the crowd and by the passengers, the people who had paid him money. And he writes in his book that he has this very disheartening moment when he's looking at these people just cursing him out and throwing things, and he looks out into the crowd, and some of these people that are cursing him out are the Foresters, based off their badges. These are the charity people that they invited him to put off this balloon thing. So seeing that things have truly went down the toilet, he pulls the plug, literally and figuratively. The Leicester Chronicle would report, "To the astonishment of everyone, the canvas which a few moments before had appeared, every inch of it, to be well filled with gas, began to hang loose, and flapped in the wind so much it was soon apparent that the gas was fast escaping, and soon the whole structure fell into a shapeless mass on the ground." And if you can believe it, this was not received that well by the 50,000 Liam Gallaghers that had gathered for this occasion. So they began rushing the balloon and tearing it to shreds and catching it on fire. The police that are present are trying their best to protect Coxwell from this encroaching crowd, but there's only 2 or 3 of them that are up there, so they're trying to push him back, but he's still getting his hair pulled out, his clothes ripped, and they're all the time screaming, rip him up, knock him on the head, and finish him. Dear Lord. And so at this point, I would like to remind everybody, this is over a balloon. So Henry eventually escaped, and he was later able to hide in the house of the town clerk. Meanwhile, back on the race course, though, someone who kind of looked like Henry had his clothes ripped to shreds, and several entrepreneurial members of the crowd were taking pieces of the burnt out balloon and selling them. So I have this great mental image in my mind's eye of Henry peeking his head over the top of the windowsill and just this drunken crowd parading the literal burnt down carcass of his balloon through the center of town. Once the dust settled, this became a huge controversy throughout the entire country. This was a gentleman who had put on a free ballooning show for the adoring public, so it seemed, and they had received him with, burning down his supplies and nearly killing him. And the newspaper reporting of this shows this, with one attendee claiming, "I never witnessed such barbarous ignorance, baseness, and injustice in my life. I feared Mr. Coxwell would be killed. I was knocked down thrice myself simply for endeavoring to defend him." In Leicester itself, they were pretty keen on the idea of blaming this on the out-of-towners. It was the Scouses that did this. It wasn't, us good, God-fearing Leicester folk. Coxwell himself blamed it on the lack of policing and the Foresters Club who put on the event for such bad planning. And because of this, blood-filled balloon riot, there was born the short-lived nickname for the people of Leicester, being balloon addicts. So Henry Tracey Coxwell would make many additions to the history books in the world of ballooning, but none of them would be so notable that they created a balloon-related slur for members of a town.